Walk into any pharmacy in India, and you will find a staggering volume of identical-sounding medicines being sold side by side. This table highlights 3 distinct variants of the drug Medzol. A doctor prescribing Medzol 400 treats intestinal worms. Drop a 0, and Medzol 40 is an acidity tablet. Drop the E, and Medzol is a powerful surgical sedative. When distinct drugs are approved to share nearly identical names on the Class 5 trademark register, a standard intellectual property dispute turns into a vector for fatal medication errors. To manage this compounding crisis, the Indian Supreme Court developed a specific legal standard known as the Doctrine of Greater Care. The doctrine imposes a strict test for what constitutes trademark confusion. If consumer goods like shoes or electronics are allowed some leeway in branding, pharmaceutical trademarks are evaluated with 0 tolerance for ambiguity to protect public health. Yet, this standard constantly collides with 2 immovable forces: a generic drug industry that intentionally relies on similar-sounding naming conventions, and a fractured system of government regulatory bodies operating in isolation. Because of these structural gaps, the doctrine of greater care remains entirely reactive. Instead of preventing dangerous drug names from entering the market, courts are forced to manage public health hazards after the fact through trademark infringement lawsuits. To understand why so many identical names exist in the first place, we have to look at how India's massive generic pharmaceutical industry signals a drug's function to prescribers. This diagram shows a word-building process that starts with International Nonproprietary Names, or INNs. These are the standardized generic designations for active ingredients. Manufacturers extract common stems like solim from the chemical alprazolam and use them to build their own commercial trademarks, like alzalam. Companies also coin brand names by stripping down the medical name of the disease itself. If 2 different manufacturers develop a treatment for falciparum malaria, they both pull the root falci, resulting in directly competing products registered as Falcigo and Falcitab. This practice creates a highly efficient shorthand for doctors, but by relying on the exact same pool of linguistic roots, the industry structurally guarantees visual and phonetic similarity across competing brands. The defense for this naming convention assumes that generic drugs sharing these stems are perfectly interchangeable, identical substitutes for one another. Up until 2017, India did not mandate bioavailability testing for generic drugs. This allowed hundreds of medications to enter the market without clinical proof that they absorbed into the human body at the same rate as the original drug. Even when the active chemical ingredient is exactly the same, manufacturers use different binders, stabilizers, and production techniques. These industrial variables dictate how the pill breaks down, directly altering its toxicity and efficacy. Because these generic counterparts do not actually perform identically inside the patient, treating them as interchangeable due to a confusingly similar brand name carries severe clinical risks. To prevent these risks, Section 13 of the Indian Trademarks Act explicitly bars the registration of any mark that is deceptively similar to an existing chemical stem. In practice, the Trademarks Registry rarely enforces this provision. They routinely approve vast clusters of similar marks under Class 5, populating the market with sound-alike drug brands. This diagram shows the legal loophole companies use when challenged. They argue that these chemical stems are common to the trade. Because the generic name nimesulide belongs to the public domain, courts often rule that no single company can claim exclusive rights over it, allowing divergent brands like Nimulide and Remulide to legally coexist. By routinely bypassing Section 13, the registry shifts the burden of protecting the public away from the trademark office and onto the courts, relying entirely on private companies to police drug safety through expensive infringement litigation. The judicial attempt to contain this problem dates back to a 1962 case called Amrit Dhara, which grounded trademark law in the physical realities of the Indian consumer. The Supreme Court recognized that patients frequently purchase medicines directly from local chemists without prescriptions, seeking quick relief. Furthermore, the average buyer evaluates a brand name as a complete unit. They do not pause to parse out the etymology or identify the chemical stems. That framework lay dormant for decades until the 2001 Cadila Healthcare ruling, where the Supreme Court formalized those observations into the strict Doctrine of Greater Care. The Cadila Court ruled that the potential for life-threatening confusion completely overrides standard pharmaceutical naming practices. They established a 7-factor test for deceptive similarity, heavily weighting the specific nature of the medicinal goods and the exact class of purchasers buying them. Drug companies frequently attempt to circumvent this strict standard by pointing to a drug's Schedule H status. They argue that because a medication requires a licensed doctor's prescription, the presence of a medical professional inherently prevents patient confusion. Courts routinely reject this defense. In cases like Astra IDL, judges point out that when competing labels are nearly identical, like Betaloc and Betalong, even doctors make phonetic mistakes. Combined with the reality that prescription drugs are frequently sold over the counter anyway, the Schedule H safeguard is functionally useless in preventing clinical errors. The Doctrine of Greater Care provides a legally sound method for evaluating risk, but it is trapped at the wrong end of the supply chain. It only punishes clinical medication errors after they have already reached the market. This chart illustrates the administrative blind spot at the heart of the crisis. The National Drug Regulator grants manufacturing licenses based purely on a pharmaceutical company's own self-certification. They do not cross-check their approvals with the Trademarks Registry. The Drugs and Cosmetics Act already prohibits the sale of spurious or deceptively similar medicines. Because drug authorities fail to access the trademark database, they consistently approve identical naming conventions. To fix this, the Cadila ruling argued that before a manufacturing license is granted, authorities must mandate an official search report from the Trademark Office. Moving the Doctrine of Greater Care upstream directly into the approval process ensures that identical trademarks are flagged before the medication is manufactured. Doing so finally aligns intellectual property law with the ultimate goal of public health policy, keeping patients safe.